Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Millennium Discourse with Sajjad Ayub and Shaykh Ebrahim Schuitma. We're on Discourse 16, which is listen. You speak very eloquently about the two principles in which we experience the world, seeing and listening. They work in different ways, do they not?
Yes, if you are, let's say, for instance, you're sitting somewhere and you're suddenly aware that somebody's giving you attention in a very particular way, and you comment to me, and you're saying to me, this person is looking at me. And then the second instance, that's instance one. Second instance, you commenting on this person's listening to me. Is there a different emotional content to those two statements? He's looking at me, he's listening to me. Does it feel different? In what way is it different? How does it feel different if you say he's looking at me? How do you feel?
Being looked at.
And he's listening to me?
Listening is an art where you go into the other person's world. Instead of hearing the sounds, you actually are in the other person's world. You give up your own agenda and you're over on the other side.
So in other words, when the guy's looking at you, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. It's kind of like, what do you want? In my youth, I did have one, particularly before I became Muslim. That's how a bar fight starts, by the way. You've probably never been in one. But how does a bar fight start? Bar fight says, what are you looking at? Always. It's the line. It's the most offensive thing. If you're staring at somebody, you've got a fight on your hands. It's predatory. You want to confront anything, you want to give it eye contact. That's confrontation. Whereas whereas if the person's listening to you, your experience, and you have this, what you're saying is, you can't describe it like you're going into their world, but what you're actually doing is you're allowing their world into you. We experience these two kinds of behaviors so differently is when the guy's looking at me, he penetrates me. He's coming into me. I always want to come, hey, stop it. I want to put my veil on, leave me alone. Whereas if he's listening to me, he's allowing me into him. So we've got these two very different uses of our attention. And they're mutually exclusive, actually. You can describe the difference between these two uses of attention as the difference between predatory and receptive attention. And what I mean by predatory attention is it's when you're goal directed, when you're trying to get stuff. So receptive attention is about what's coming towards you. Predatory attention is about what you want to go and get. So if you and these modalities of attention, actually, I mean, they're part of our deep construct as living beings. I mean, it's almost as if Allah had a number of iterations before He could produce the human being that had this peculiar mix, because He made predators. And and where does any predator's eye sit? Like a lion, its eye sits in the front of its head. And the reason why its eye sits at the front of its head is that gives a depth perception. And why does a predator need depth perception? Because a predator needs to be able to plan. A predator needs to work out, this is going to do this, that, I'm going to do that, it's going to do that, and I'm going to catch. And that's what so that whole ability that we have to be goal orientated, to be results focused, is our predatory sense, and that's why in business today we seem to think that this is such a a clever thing to develop in people is this predatory attention, this predatory sense of being goal-directed, having a vision, having all of these really visual kind of predatory kind of description. If you look at a prey animal, like a deer or a buck, its eyes sit on the side of its head. Now, why is the eyes here and not here? Well, its attention is not designed for what it wants to go and get. It's just about what's going to come and get it. What's coming towards me, you know? So there's these two modalities of attention. What do I want to go and get? And what's coming towards me? Now, we have been made in such a way that we are the ones that can attest that what is coming towards me is better for me than what I can go get. Because he is Khairul Makirin. Who's the planner? The one who produces outcomes, the one who has the vision, the predator, the one who produces, who goes, gets the outcome. He's better than us. So he produces better outcomes for us, which means to say we need to develop in order to really recognize that he is the planner, he's the master of outcomes, we need to strengthen what is, for most people, a bit of an underdeveloped capacity. We need to strengthen our receptive attention and put the dimmer switch on our predatory attention. Because, you know, we've got to allow things to come towards us ourselves and stop pursuing things quite as hard as we're pursuing them. So all of the practices that we do, you know, it's all about strengthening the muscle of receptive attention. You know, salah, fasting, they're all about building receptive attention. The capacity to forego the outcome that you're trying to manage, to sit back, be patient. What does patience mean? Patience means I'm not going to gun the outcome now. I'm going to sit on my hands and not try and put my hands on the steering wheel to get the thing I want. Close my mouth. I'm going to forego the outcome. That's what patience requires you to do. It's one of the first virtues of deen. Why? Why are you required to do that? So that you can develop the skill of taking your hands off the wheel, allowing this greater plan to take place, so that you can then be in a position to recognize that his plan is better than yours. He's the better master. He's the superlative master of outcomes. And that our job is actually to witness just how extraordinary he is. That's why he made us. You know, that requires us to develop our ability to see what's coming towards us rather than to pursue what we're trying to get, which is why Islam is called submission. It is surely predation and submission are antonyms. Surely submission is something that is more consistent with what happens to a deer than what happens to a lion. And so in the bigger scheme of things, I mean, we do have to live a life, etc. But in the bigger scheme of things, our big job is not to be in charge, but to forego being in charge. So allow things to come towards us rather than us going towards them. So that's why I think it's important to develop this understanding of the two modalities of attention, and to recognize that actually spiritual work is about developing the second modality. It's about developing our receptive attention, and not about our predatory attention. Yeah.
Do you think in the West that we're trying to literally focus on life, and our focus is, right, this is the goal that I want to achieve, this is the job that I want, this is the business that I want, and we drive towards that on an ongoing basis?
That's exactly right. Which means we live contending and contentious lives. Because you see, one of the ways of distinguishing between predatory and receptive attention, when a person's attention is predatory, they're trying to step into the world and get the thing that they want. You know, They're trying to get the limelight. They're trying to grab. They're trying, So but now the problem is that I step into center stage, there's only place for one, and that's me, which means my fundamental engagement with others is competitive. There's only place for one in the middle. And I want to be the one in the middle because I want the thing that I want. So as soon as I engage my predatory attention, I'm not only am I experienced as being dangerous. I mean, I am dangerous to the people around me. I will, by definition, my engagement with the world will be contentious. I mean, that's why the bar fight starts with, what are you looking at? That's the first. Any big conflict always starts with the confrontation. There's only space on this carpet for one, and it's not going to be you. It's going to be me. When you, and that's also then consistent with trying to get an outcome. Because if I want something from you, I'm trying to lay hands on, because the thing that I want is with you. So I'm trying to lay hands on you, and that becomes like a wrestling match. And I have to subdue you to get what I want. There's another way of being, of course, and that is to develop your receptive attention, because then you aren't so outwardly gathered in terms of how you deal with the world. It's like literally like the person who's sitting and listening. He's allowing the world to come to him. In other words, he's vacating space. He's not standing center stage to sit back. He's vacating space. That vacating space allows the other to arise. It allows people to come up. It allows, and because it's like it's almost like the greatest sense of generosity that you can give somebody is to give them space, to allow them to be. Which means to say that people's experience of you is then what is a harmonious one, because you're allowing them to be, you creating space. So while we are like these hotshot executives that we're trying to develop in this world, that are results focused and have visions, and that are gunning for things, and that have are killer leaders. I've actually worked for a Pakistani business once where they fired me because I wouldn't endorse the idea that they had to create killer leaders. I thought, that is bizarre. Killer leaders. I mean, who wants that? Why do you want that? Sort of go-getters, kind of this. These are all destructive ways of being. They produce people whose lives become wreckage, because they're always contending. They're contending with their teams. They're contending with the businesses they run. They're contending with their spouses. They're contending with their family. Their lives are a war zone, And they get spat out anyhow. I mean, they kind of, at the end of the day, they're useless. They can't do anything. They end up, miserable and alienated, alone in a flat somewhere, or if they're unlucky, if they're lucky, in an institution for the aged. What kind of a life is that? We've bought a way of looking at being alive, which has been the sort of the modern business school, and I dare say it's not accurate to say the Western business school way of looking at things, because you find exactly the same psychology in lumps in the Lahore University of Management Science. They teach people to think like this at universities today, particularly in business schools. That's how we think people should run enterprises. They should be go-getters. They should be predators, hunters. They're kind of like very destructive stuff. Very destructive stuff. And I dare say that actually enterprises succeed very often not because we teach people this kind of mentality, but despite the fact that we teach people this kind of mentality. And I've heard it said, a number of executives that I've consulted over the year, you wouldn't touch an MBA graduate with a barge pole, because they're dangerous people, because of the intent that is put into them when they look at business. They get inculcated with a predatory approach to being in charge of organizations.
And what could those MBA executives, those MBA graduates, what could they do to now take on this other approach, other than having that predatory attention, that focus? How could they now look at life?
Well, they could understand that the people who they lead aren't resources for them to use to achieve an end.
Okay.
They're actually there to give them something. So, I mean, there's a thought experiment that I'd like you to consider in this regard. And it's a means and ends thought experiment. And say, well, you know, I mean, so if you say, what's the bottom line of the deep language that MBA graduates get taught about being in charge of enterprises, and when, you know, what is the aim of the leader? They'll say, well, the leader's job is to achieve a result through people. That's what he does, you know, and that's considered to be the appropriate way of looking at leadership. Leadership is about achieving a result through people. And what's amazing is some people even think that that statement sounds benign. I mean, that's bizarre. It's like, you know, it's like cannibalism, because you're treating people like resources. You know? So it's to that the enterprise is going to succeed if you don't have people working in the enterprises who are committed to the enterprise. If they're just there because they have to be there to earn a living, you know, then you're not going to, you win because they are there because they want to be there. They're not working because they have to. They're working because they want to. So how does one create the difference? So what's the difference between working for a boss because you have to and working for a boss because you want to? There's a very simple little thought experiment that helps to demonstrate that. You've got two subordinates, Sajjad. You're the boss, and you've got two subordinates. We're going to call the one Isa, and we're going to call the other one Ahmad. All right. And you say to Isa, in 1980, I did what you have to do now, and what I did work. Don't argue with me. Shut up and go and do what I did. And you say to Ahmad, in 1980, I did what you're supposed to do now, and what I did work that may be helpful to you. Take a look at it. So, no gold star for the right answer. But who's going to work? Who's going to work because he wants to? Well, Isa's going to work because he has to, and Ahmad's going to work because he wants to. And the question is, why? What makes those two interactions different? Well, you could say that you're being more rude with Isa than what you are being with Ahmad, but that's just for dramatic effect. Actually, there's something else that's going on that sits under the surface that's not immediately apparent, and that becomes apparent when you separate two variables, means and ends. And you put into those two categories either the person who's doing the job or the job that's being done. So if you say to Isa, in 1980, I did what you have to do, what I did worked, go and do what I did. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the same job done as you got done in 1980. So that's your end. And Isa, the person, is your means to achieve that. So you're using Isa to get there. You're achieving the result through the person. Let's assume that in the Ahmed case, you actually meant what you said. This wasn't a piece of clever chicanery that they taught you in business school. You actually meant what you said. I did this. It might be helpful to take a look. The question is, could you have a different result from what you had in 1980? Of course you could. It could be a complete disaster. So your end isn't to get the same job done, because the job could be a disaster. What is your end? You're actually trying to teach Ahmed something. And what gives you the opportunity to teach him something is the job that he's doing. So in Isa's case, you were using the person as the means to get a job done. In Ahmed's case, you're using the job as the opportunity to teach Ahmed something. You know, and what makes those two things different is the difference is based on your intent. In Isa's case, Isa would experience that you were there to get something from him. Your intent is to take. Your intent is predatory. In Ahmed's case, he experiences that you're there to be helpful to him. Your intent is to give him something. Your intent is receptive because who's the hero in the Ahmed case is Ahmed. You're trying to make him the star. Whereas in Isa's case, you're trying to be the star yourself. You're the one who's taking center stage. In the Ahmed case, you're allowing Ahmed to be. Now, the question is this. Which one of these two, where are you likely to have a more successful business? Whether you have people working for you like Isa or people working for you like Ahmed. And clearly it's when people are working for you like Ahmed. Now that means to say that when you look, what are you actually doing? If you say describe leadership from the point of view that leadership is about achieving a result through people, because you're using the person again. If you wanted to use the same words to describe what you're doing with Ahmad, you'd have to say leadership is about achieving people through results. Because your aim is to build the person, and people say, but that doesn't even make sense. But that does make sense, because that's exactly what a coach does. You know, a coach of any sports team, his job isn't to produce a result. That's what the player is there for. His job is to coach the player. That doesn't mean to say he doesn't have the game or the results. I mean, those two things are his tools in order to build the play. In other words, he uses the game that's being played. He uses the result as his means to cultivate a player. His product is a player. A leader's product should be the people working for him. And the enterprise that he's running is the gymnasium that he uses to make them exceptional people. When he does that, he passes all the fundamental rules. I'm not the significant one. I'm here to make the significant one. I'm not here to compete and contend. I'm here to collaborate. I step out of the way. I don't try and take center stage. I make possible. And because he does that, he creates a collaborative experience with the people who work for him that then creates the condition the organization succeeds. Because it's now no longer dependent on the ingenuity of one. It's now dependent on the ingenuity of the many who are all contributing or being enabled to contribute. So this issue of the difference between predatory and receptive attention is not just theory. This is immensely practical. Immensely practical. Actually, the difference between having truly successful enterprises and failing enterprises. So nobody taught you, you see, that your masala is actually is sort of should be what you get. It should be the first trick, the first skill you learn in order to be trusted with an enterprise. How to submit, how to step out the way, how to become receptive and not predatory.
Mm-hmm. So would I be right in saying that the sight is almost superficial, concerned with material assessment of the world, whereas listening is just about hearing sounds, but concerned with inner meaning?
Yeah, you can say that. You can say that because it is when when you're looking at something, I mean, in the first instance, I see you because I delineate your shape, you know. Whereas it looks like when I'm looking at you, you're over there and I'm over here. Whereas when I'm listening to you, I can actually feel the sound in me. I much more definitely have to let you into me to hear. You know, although the same thing is actually happening when I'm looking, it doesn't appear to be the case. You know, so it is true to say that when you're listening, it requires a greater sensitivity and a more subtle approach to attention than what than when you're looking. That's absolutely correct. Yeah, there's also this thing of, you know, it is true though that you can turn your eye into an ear, because that was the first command to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. You know, variously translated either as recite or read. Reading's a really intriguing skill because you're using your eyes, but what are you doing? You're translating what you're seeing into language. You're turning your eye into an ear. And that was his first command, the first command to his Rasul, and therefore his first command to all humanity. Turn your eye into an ear. Start reading. Start allow the meanings in. You know, soften your eye. Alhamdulillah.
On that note, thank you again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.